Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. Welcome to Managing Jamf School Deployment, Scaling Student Success with Ease. A couple housekeeping items. If you do need translation or assistance, there's a QR code over there by the door, and we could do that. There will be Q&A at the end. So we'll save about 5-ish minutes as students run through the content to go through that, and then I will run through the audience and ask questions. Happy to present this today. It's hard to pick favorite Jamf products like your children, but I am really given that we are in a school session about Jamf School, it's one of my favorite products, having been involved with it since we acquired ZuluDesk. And today we have Ant Darlow, Consulting Engineer for Education, deeply invested. I've worked with Ant on many projects over the years and brings a lot of experience and success with Jamf School products. So Ant Darlow, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. Cheers, thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony, as Mike's just said, but please do call me Ant. I am a consultant engineer for our EMEA region here at Jamf. And that basically means that I'm specifically looking after our customers that are education focused, our education product focused, and our education solutions. So today we're here to talk about configuring Jamf School with ease, and then how we can scale with this. So there's a couple of things I want to start with in terms of kind of expectations, I suppose. First things first, we are going to be talking about our Jamf School instance. I'm not going to be talking about how to set up devices, and that's because I think getting this piece of the puzzle right first is actually the most important thing that we need to do. Deploying the devices is the last piece of the puzzle. It's the most fun piece of the puzzle. We've got a lot of work to do beforehand. The next thing is, as with many things, there are many routes to success here. I'm going to talk about what I've seen our customers use and be most successful with, but that doesn't mean that's going to be right for you. So there are a couple of times where we go through some things today, and you'll realize that's not really for me, and I perhaps want to do it the other way, and that's perfectly fine as well. And then the big one for me is when we have projects like this, they always feel like IT projects, but it's really important to make sure we involve all of the stakeholders. So that doesn't just include the IT people. This could even include students, because ultimately they're going to be using the devices, but we should definitely be listening to teachers and any kind of admin person that touches the devices or has any interaction with the devices along the way as well. So when we talk about scaling, this means many different things to people as well. This could be quite simply, this is your first deployment, and scaling is I'm about to deliver my first lot of Apple devices to my students, to my teachers. It could simply mean that I am growing the estate that I already have. And it can go right the way through to maybe I'm a single admin in a single school, but actually now I'm working with other admins from other schools, or I'm managing multiple schools all in one go. And then maybe we need to start looking at a central policy, a central admin team to help manage these kind of things. It doesn't really matter where you are in this journey. We've got things today that will really help you out. So, in my opinion, there are two pillars of Jamf School when it comes to configuring the server or the instance itself. And that is the configuration objects, so things like apps and profiles, and then something that's called locations, which is quite unique to Jamf School. And then the second thing is the user assignment, but I don't really like the word user because of the way that we deal with users in Jamf School. I prefer to talk about them as identity. It makes things a lot more flexible, and we can use them for automating our deployments, which we'll see later. So the first thing we'll look at is how to configure these things, and then at the very end, it'll become really obvious how one informs the other to create this scale with ease. I could literally give anybody a device, and they'd configure it based on their needs and their identity. So let's start to have a look at how we can use locations, because that's what we're going to look at first, because it's quite key to everything that we do here when it comes to scaling. Now, what might happen if you've got a situation where you are coming under like one central management, so like say if you're kind of like a district of schools, for example, or a city of schools, is you might have a school that has Jamf School and has ASM. In fact, you might have all of your schools in that district that have their single ASM and their single Jamf School. For IT admins, that's probably the worst thing possible, because anytime that I need to do anything, I need to do it to each and every individual server. And if I'm trying to make something consistent across the whole thing, that becomes really problematic, because after all, we're all human. And the chances are we're going to forget to tick a box over here, and then we're going to get a different experience with this school to that school, and that's not what we're looking to do. So how can we make things a bit better here? So we could instead look to have one single ASM. Now that's a bit of a unicorn depending on whereabouts you are in your journey and how long people have been using Apple devices in your district, I guess. Because what we would really like is one single ASM, and we can use locations. If you've used ASM before, you're aware of these locations, and they represent each individual school. The chances are, though, if you have schools that were early adopters, you've probably got one or two, hopefully not more than that, ASMs, and that's totally fine as well, but this is really what we were looking to aim for, one single ASM with locations. And that's because we also have locations in Jamf School. So if you are in a situation where you're bringing multiple schools together and trying to do a central IT sort of deployment here, where you can really affect all the devices no matter which school they're in, we really advise that you use Jamf School and you use locations. Now, if you're that kind of like district level admin or that central admin team, what the advantage here is that when you log into these services, you get to see everything. So you get to see and affect both items in ASM and in School Manager. And you don't have to log into all of those individual servers. It's one login, you can see everything completely. But at the same time, you can give those individual location admins their own piece of the pie, and they can only see what's available for them without all the confusion of everybody else's devices and the worry that if I'm an admin in location A, that I'm going to do anything to location B. So there's some real advantages here from that top-down approach, but on that individual level as well. So I want to show you some examples of this working in action. There's two places that we can see this. The first one is when we start to look at ADE configurations, and then the second one is some of the global settings that we have. We're going to have a look at the ADE settings first. So if we took this situation and we're assigning devices for our ADE profiles and our deployments, we could say as central management, as central IT management, we actually procure all of our iPads centrally as well. So that's going to be a job that I do. I'm going to make sure that when these devices are purchased, I'm going to create a one-to-one connection with my main Jamf School instance. And as that admin from that district level, when it comes into School Manager, I'm going to make sure it automatically gets assigned over to Jamf School. And then me, as that central admin, I can say this is the school that it belongs to. And I haven't got to bother the individual IT people in those schools to do this. So that's a great thing. You're taking work from their plate and doing that centrally, and they'll be really appreciative of that. However, remember I said there are routes to success here? That doesn't work for everybody. So we can also create a connection between each location in Jamf School when it comes to this, and then allow the administrators from those locations to do the same job. What's really nice about that, though, is that you can have the central IT admin still see everything, still oversee everything, so that they can support if and when they need to. But it's, like I say, down to the individual location admin to actually do the assignments based on things that they know about that central IT don't. Maybe it's things like the order number that the devices were purchased under, or the serial numbers that they've got in front of them right now. Point is, it really doesn't matter which way you do it. You're going to be able to do this with success, and it's all to do with the stakeholders, what works for you. And again, this looks quite confusing when you look at it like this, but that admin, that's the location admin, gets a really simple view. So we're making it easy for them as well. And then the actual settings in the server as well can be kind of done from this central level, which can actually be really useful. So as we go along, I'm going to show some examples in the console. And you can see there's the little pink icon at the top there. That's going to represent our district or our central level view. And there's going to be a different color one when we drop down into a location view. So we've gone into the settings here in Jamf School. And what you'll be able to see is that in the top corner there is a little box that says, I can enforce this for all my locations. So let's take an example here that in this particular pane, I've set up things that are when I want all of my devices to update their apps. And it might be that I've created some sort of policy on my network configuration as well that it can handle more traffic at a certain time of day across my entire estate of schools as well. So I might want every single school's devices to update between a set period of time. I don't want the individual admin of their part of the server to change this. So I can then enforce that for all the locations below it, whether that's 2 or 3 or whether that's 200, it really doesn't matter. On the location admin, and you can see now that that's green, that's going to represent our location, you can see that they're able to see the settings that were set at that central level. So we've got that transparency. As central IT, we're not trying to do something without them knowing about it. But you can see at the very top there's a message to say this is read-only, this is something that is enforced from the top. So when it comes to locations, you can see we're starting to be able to, from that central level, really push down some of these configurations or these settings to all the locations below. So we've got a consistent feel across all of our devices and everybody has the same experience. But what about the device management strategies? Now, in my mind, there's really three different strategies we can take. The first one is district scoped. So as that district level IT, as central IT, I can enforce policy across every single device, across all locations. That's good for something that we must ensure is on a device. The second one is district shared. So maybe I create policy at that district level, but actually I say, this is for you to use if and when you want to. And then the third one is what I'm going to call location governed, and that's like your conventional as a local admin, a location admin. I create my own things and we just get on with it, and I'm kind of working my own little bubble. The question kind of is, well, which one of these strategies should I use? And in my opinion, a good deployment uses a combination of all three of these depending on the needs that you have and what you're trying to achieve. So again, let's try and visualize some of these things that we're talking about here. On the screen here, you'll see the top server, with the Jamf logo on there. That's going to be our district level, and then we've got the green school and the pink school. Now, if all that I did was use locations and brought all of my devices and all my schools onto one Jamf school, if that's all that I did, and that I didn't do anything else in terms of management, when I log in with, or when I enroll all my devices and deploy my devices within the locations, I get something that happens really special at that district level anyway. Okay? As soon as I do enroll devices and add users there, at that district level, I actually get to see all of my devices and all my users. Now, think of all those times where you've had IT devices, so Apple devices, in your schools, and you didn't know that they were there. Being able to see all of the devices that are enrolled into all of your servers is a great way for you to actually understand how many devices are within your grasp, because sometimes things get added to this school, perhaps iPads get donated, perhaps location admins go away and buy their devices through not the proper means, as it were. So it's a great thing that you can just see all these devices before we've even started to manage anything. So from the console, at this top level again, you'll be able to see that I can see devices from all different locations. I can do things like filter these down as well. So if I was looking for a particular subset at a particular location, I can go away and do that. And of course, when I do that, it then just shows me the devices from those locations. But remember, as that district or central level IT, I haven't had to log into multiple servers to find this information. It's one login, I get to see everything. And of course, as you'd expect, you can build reports and pull out this data through CSVs, pre or post these kind of filtering things, which again is great. If we're thinking about stakeholders, who else might be able to benefit from this information, get them involved and help them understand what it is that they need. Maybe it's a team that looks after asset management or something like that. It's about involving everybody. So we already have some advantages, even if all that we did was enroll the devices and just use this location setup, but most of us are going to want to do a little bit more. So what we can do is we can create some configurations at the top district level, and some of them will automatically share down. Things like profiles that I created at that top level and things to do around School Manager. There are then other things that I can choose to share with all locations. So maybe I buy an app at the top district level, I could opt to share that down to every location below it as well. That means that then as a location admin, I'm able to scope things that I've created myself or that have been shared to me from the district level. Now, if we just think about this for a second, let's just say we had a passcode policy from central IT. We've got a policy, we want all of our devices to have these three criteria on our passcode policy. If we didn't have locations and we had to sign into every single server, I might have to do that 10 times, 20 times, depending on how many schools you've got. And like I say, there's room for error there. Here, I create that policy once at that district level, and it filters down exactly the same to every single location. And that means if in the future I need to change that policy, I only need to change it once, but it will affect every single device that's in my school, which is great. And again, remember, from that location level, it's a much, much more simplified view. In fact, from a locations admin point of view, they just think they've got one Jamf server and they're only managing their devices, where in reality, there's so much more going on. And of course, they can scope things from both of these buckets here, but central IT does have some control about how these devices are managed. Again, let's have a look at what that looks like in the server. You'll see here, this is a district level created profile. Now, this is kind of a bit outside of the scope of what we are talking about, but I think it's worth looking at. You'll see that I've been quite specific in how I name this. And again, it's about making sure all of our stakeholders are informed so our location admins know what's going on. You'll see I've put things like it is a district profile, that it's a recommended profile. And I've also mentioned in the description there all of the actual payloads that I'm using so that when it comes to troubleshooting, that location admin doesn't, again, feel pushed out or it looks like that central IT is trying to control what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So I would really recommend that if you are going to do this, you really think about that naming structure to help with the troubleshooting and whatnot when it comes to the location admins. When I drop down to a location, you'll see that as well as the naming convention that I've just put in there, we at Jamf School add the little tag so that you can see that it's a shared profile. And much like the settings tab, the admin can go in there, so there's full transparency of what it is we're actually doing with this profile, and there's that read-only banner at the top there as well, so showing that they can only see this and they can't actually do anything else with it. So as you can see, there are some management advantages to doing this as well. But this, a shared profile, is simply this. It's a profile that is shared down to those devices. It's up to the school admins to actually use them and to actually scope them in. The thing is, though, if you do involve these people, like the location admins, the chances are they're going to use what you've populated for them. This is particularly true if the location admins are a single admin person rather than a team, for example. You're doing the work for them. They can just simply use what you've got there. Or if perhaps the IT team aren't as confident in managing Apple as with other devices, you've provided these recommended configurations that they can just use straight out of the box. And for most people, they'll just use them and thank you for it. Of course, you're going to have teams that are probably more advanced in a certain school than the other. Get them involved in helping inform that central level configuration would be my advice. But of course, there are other times where as central IT, it's essential that every device does have these configurations. It's not an option that we want our location admins to use. We must do it. And for that, we can build the profiles at the top, and then we can scope them to everything that we can see at that top level. Only all of the groups that we've created and we've enrolled the devices at the location levels and the groups we've created there don't exist in that top location level. So we have to be a bit more broad and create some more device groups up at the top. Well, once we've done that, we can ensure that this configuration is enforced on every single device. No matter what location they're in, they will always get that configuration. And these can be things like if you've got a district-wide Wi-Fi, for example, you might want to push that from the very top so that everybody has it and you haven't got to worry about that. Passcode policies is another good one. Maybe if you were deploying something like Jamf Safe Internet, you could do that from that central level so everybody's got that content filtering piece of the puzzle. And once again, from that location level, it's really, really simple for that admin to know what's going on. They've got configurations that have been scoped at the top level, enforced, and then they've got the option to scope things from a bucket that the central IT have created, or they can use the things that they've created themselves. And again, from that top-down approach, the central admins have the ability to really start to enforce some of this thing or have some sort of control about how these devices are managed. Again, in the console, very similar to what we've just seen before. A couple of key differences for me when it comes to that naming convention. I would say that it was from the district, and I would say that it's already scoped, it's been enforced, and I'd probably put in the description that the local admin hasn't got to really worry about this. It's been handled from that top-down approach. The admin can go in though and see what's going on with the profile, and we scope it from the top level there. You can see that's a group, and when we do go into the profile in the location, again, it's shared. You'll be able to see that shared group at the top there, but they won't be able to click on it because it doesn't belong in their location. But again, it's all about transparency. So I said at the beginning, I'm going to try and go through this and talk about things that we've seen most people have success with. This is actually going to be the point where I flip this around a little bit. These are some things that we've seen people do that really kind of can cause a bit of problems. Because the first thing that happens is as soon as we talk around this kind of thing and we say, you can enforce things from that top level so that everything has, every device below it has the enforced configurations or whatever, we often have admins that go, great, I'm going to do everything at the top level. Now, if you do that, you've kind of missed the point of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to give the flexibility to people on the ground that are using these devices on a day-to-day basis, that are talking to the teachers and needing to flip configuration there and then because it's really important, it's going to impact their class, while still giving central IT some ability to be able to enforce the really, really important things. So, what are the problems that happen when people go, yeah, we're just going to do everything from the top level? The first one is target groups. As I already mentioned, the devices are enrolled and the users are imported to that location level, and they should be. But any granular groups that you have there don't apply to that top level. So the first thing that happens is people go, well, okay, at that district level, I'm going to want to target all grade 3 class A iPads. It's like, if you're trying to do that from that point, again, you've missed the point. That should be done at the location level. This should be really broad groups, things like all of my iPads in the entire state, right? Not the kind of individual use cases that you might have on them. I guess that kind of really works, in my opinion, logistically what happens as well. If you're a central IT team, you don't on a day-to-day basis do the things to the devices, right? You let the people that are closer to the devices do those things, the people that are at the schools. So really, we need to think that when we're doing Jamf School and we're looking at this setup, anything we do at that district level should really be the same thing. It's more of a viewing platform. We can enforce some things for sure, but it should be really light touch and it should be really quite broad, leaving that flexibility to those location admins. I'll give you an example of what happens if we perhaps ignore the advice that I'm giving here of don't enforce everything from the top, because we create some really large scopes. There's a customer that I once worked with, 70,000 odd devices, right? Now imagine you were that customer that had 70,000 devices. And let's say that you push all of your apps from the very top level. Let's say the app that I want to push today is iMovie. Now, the last time I looked at how big iMovie was, it was about 1 gig. Okay? So I'm going to push iMovie to all of my 70,000 devices, all at the same time. Can your network handle it? Probably not. Even over multiple schools, probably not. Never mind that. That requires 70,000 times however many APNN connections to Apple, APNS connections to Apple. I'm pretty sure they'll probably stop that from happening pretty quickly as well. So you've got to be worried, you've got to have a think about the kind of scopes that you can create if you use this in the wrong way and how that will impact your device management as well. So they're the configuration options. Let's now look at identity, because for me, this is the key part of the puzzle. Yes, we all know how configurations work. I'm just kind of saying how we can share them between all of our locations. But identity is key, in my opinion, in Jamf School. And it's the way that we deploy the devices. It's the use case. It's the fact that this student over here gets a device and it must be set up in a particular way. Now, in order for us to do that, there's really 3 key elements, in my opinion, here. And the really, really important piece is creating smart groups. We need to be able to filter out that this student or this teacher lives in this particular location and has these kind of configurations before the devices get enrolled. Remember, I said all of this really needs to be put in place beforehand. And that means I need to know about some things prior to enrolling these devices. And the 2 things that really I need to know, or the really biggest thing, is that my Jamf School server needs to understand about the identity that I'm about to bring in. So it needs to have access or needs to have a kind of creation, a configuration with my IDP or my directory or however you want to look at it really. If you don't do that prior to enrolling your devices, you can't make the automations that make scaling easy, whether or not, like I say, that's from your first deployment right the way through to maybe that district-wide kind of thing. So when we do pull identity in, what kind of things are we looking for? Well, realistically, if we think about how we're going to deploy these devices, we need to enroll them. So we need to know about users. We need to know who's going to enroll these devices. We want to make sure only those people can enroll devices. So we're going to need to know some sort of password or something like that to do with that particular device as well. We're going to need to know what groups they perhaps live in, especially if you've got a structure that is like all of my students, and those students are grade 1, and within grade 1 you've got this kind of class. And I'm sure that you already have some sort of identity service that has that kind of setup. And then, of course, if you're using the great tools like Apple Classroom or Jamf Teacher, you need to know about some of those details like Apple IDs or what classes or rosters you have in your Apple School Manager as well. Sounds simple, only there's 4 different ways that you can bring identity into Jamf School. Okay? So let's have a look at the 4 different options that we have and then figure out which one of these is best for you. So the first one we're going to look at is authentication. So the authentication module that's built into Jamf School works like this. It checks the credential live, which is great. That means that I can go away and say, I'm this user, is my password right? If it is, I'll enroll the device. The only thing is if I only set this up, it adds the user after enrollment. That's no good for us. We need to be able to create that automation. It means we need to know about that user prior to that. And even when it does add that user, it has no concept of what groups it might be in that directory. And because we don't have any group information, so that we know that this student lives in this group rather than that one and has a different configuration, we can't do any of the identity-based automation that I'm going to show at the very end. So it's okay, but all it does is really that's useful for us is the credential check. The next one is synchronization. If we were only to set up synchronization, it does add the users and the groups on sync, which means we can do that before the device is enrolled. That's great. We can have identity-based automation. We know about these people before the device is enrolled. Unfortunately, though, it has no awareness of passwords. So it doesn't bring any password data with it. There's nothing like that. So the user would be on the enrollment screen, and the device would become a brick. So if we only use synchronization, we're still missing a piece of the puzzle. Then we've got Apple School Manager. Yep, this is great. We have information here that we don't have in any of our other directories, things like our managed Apple accounts, things like our class and roster data. Now this one's one where you might be able to get some identity-based automation depending on how much data you have in ASM. So if you're using grade levels and things like that, you probably could do it. In my experience, people don't populate ASM as well as they could do. So in my opinion, we probably couldn't do the automation based on the identity, at least not in the way that we want to. And even if we could, there again is no awareness of passwords, so I would be stuck on the enrollment screen. Then we've got the fourth option here, and that is to import with either CSV or API. Actually, this is the best thing that we could do. It's got the most flexibility, but unfortunately, it comes at the biggest cost because you're either manipulating CSV files, which is a manual job, or you have to have the time and skills to be able to build tools using APIs. So I wouldn't say I would recommend doing it this way, but it is the most powerful way to bring in your user and your identities. And that's because you can create and add users and groups. You can create passwords, and the one that's the really special one is here. You can pre-assign users to devices. So if you've got smaller children, then the concept of a username and password perhaps isn't there with them yet, you can pre-assign devices so when they turn on, the identity is of that child. Or maybe you have devices that are based in a cart that move around the school, and you would pre-assign them perhaps a name that's relevant to that cart. So iPad 1, cart 3, for example. You can pre-assign that so as soon as it turns on, it knows its identity and can configure itself accordingly. So they're the four different things. Not really expecting you to remember what they all do in that short amount of time, so I've built this table here for you. And what you'll see is if you want green across everything, you kind of need to use all four ways of pulling in this identity in order to get the maximum effect of this. I like to think of this as what I call like a super user, and I don't mean like a super admin user. All I mean is I've pulled all this information into Jamf School from different directories to give this super user that has all this information that physically doesn't live anywhere else. Right? What other system has all of this information? ASM doesn't have all of this information because it's not aware of your user groups in your directory. Your directory doesn't have things like managed Apple ID or roster information. So you need a bit of everything to work with this. So how does this all flow together? It's all very well saying this is how it all works. How do we pull all this identity in? How does this all work together? So in Jamf School, we need these three key facts, right? We want to use our match ASM syncing. We want to match the user. This is an important thing here. We don't want to create an additional user. We want to append the information about our Apple managed accounts, managed Apple accounts, should I say, and roster data over here. We need to be aware of authentication for that enrollment piece. And for me, the really biggest part here is we need that sync data for that user structure for the automations. These are the three things that we need to plug into from that data into Jamf School. So we're going to use Apple Classroom. The data that we get from here, we're going to use for our classroom management tools. So our things like Classroom, our things like Jamf Teacher. We're also going to have our directory. And we're going to use this, and this is where our user structure comes in from. We're going to use this for managing our devices. So this is where I can say that if you live in this particular group, you're going to have this kind of configuration. Now in Jamf School, we support three different methods when it comes to the identity that we can use for, or the connections we can use for the management identity piece. We have Entra, Google, and Secure LDAP. Now, let's be fair. We're talking about education here. These aren't populated manually. They're populated from a source of truth, an SIS, right? If the child doesn't belong or the teacher doesn't belong in that system, they officially don't exist, right? These systems get populated through that. So let's bring that into the mix as well. Now, how that system does that doesn't really matter for today, but it is probably an important piece of the puzzle because that's where all this other data gets populated from in those services we're going to connect with. This isn't required. it's nice and recommended if you federate between school manager and the directory, your identity management. It becomes a nicer experience for your user because they just have that one username, that one password for their Apple accounts and things as well. So not required, just a recommendation. So they're the systems that we're going to use. How do we plug them actually into Jamf School? The first one is Apple School Manager. This was pretty easy. There is a direct connection in Jamf School built in that will pull the data that you need from Apple School Manager. Easy. The next one's authentication. So we can authenticate with all three of our supported methods here. If you're using the Entra or the Google kind of way of doing it, it's done via an enterprise-style app. I'm sure you'll be familiar with that if you've done this before. Or you can connect this directly with your LDAP. When it comes to syncing data, though, so syncing these users in, which is that all-important piece to get this automation to work first, you can only use LDAP. You can't use your Entra or Google connections. That means you need to have the ability to allow Jamf School to talk to your LDAP server directly that's going to most likely be on-prem. So there's some firewall rules there that you'll need to put into place that allows access to Jamf School Cloud, which will be a problem for people. Some people it won't be, for some people it absolutely will be. The thing is though, you're probably already sitting on the solution that you need and you perhaps just don't know it yet. Because let's be fair, that source of truth that you have, right? Who actually directly works with that data? And when I say directly, I mean like, with the database that that system might have. The answer is going to be probably nobody. They're going to have provided an app themselves for you to manipulate that data, or more often than not, you work with a company whose actual business is to take the data from SIS and provision accounts in other systems. I'm going to call them data brokers for the sake of this, because they are brokering data between different services and provisioning accounts. Simple. The chances are, like I say, you are working with a data broker already to provision accounts in ASM. Almost every data broker that I speak to will provision accounts in ASM now. It's not that new. And of course, we can guarantee that they are providing services into Entra and Google as well, right? But what you could do to completely get rid of that LDAP problem is work with a data broker and ask them to provision accounts directly into Jamf School for you, because after all, that's their business, that's what they do. There are many data brokers that already will offer this as out-of-the-box solutions, and at the end, I'm going to provide a link with some resources, along with some links to some data brokers that are on our Jamf marketplace that do out-of-the-box work with Jamf School and will provision accounts. I've also worked with some data brokers in some regions that out-of-the-box don't work with Jamf School, but because it's their business to provision accounts, they very quickly were able to create a custom connection for that customer. So if you are using a data broker and you need to get that information in there, work with them, because I'm sure it's something they can do, because after all, as I've said a few times now, that is their business. That's what they make money out of doing. Going back to the locations thing that we said at the beginning, just to start to tie this up, you can actually do this per location if you needed to as well. So if it's not a centralized identity management system that you have and you need to do this per location, you can set this up per location as well. So we've kind of spoken about the fact that there are differences in what success mean. We looked at configuring the instance very briefly, but in looking at how we did this from a top-down approach and made things individual as well for their IT. And now what we're seeing here is once we've got all that in place and we've got the identity, we use an identity for automation. It's a very fast video, I absolutely understand that, but essentially I could have given an iPad from my estate, any iPad, to that user, and because they logged in, and because all the automation was in place and we had all the details already, I think it was Jack that signed in. We knew that Jack was in this location, we knew that Jack that was part of students, that they were part of this grade group, they were part of da-da-da-da-da, and they got the configuration that they needed. And that just means that I could have given him another iPad, he logs in again, and he'll get exactly the same consistent deployment. And when you've got something that's this easy, that's how you can scale devices from a few hundred to a few thousand without much of an uplift, because you've got all that information in place, you've got all that data in there. And from looking at this, you wouldn't know, right? You wouldn't know where those configurations come from, but from this configuration here, some of the things that we've got on this device are enforced from that top level, district level. Some of it is shared and our admins have decided that they're going to use it, and other ones they've created themselves. And it also means that if I take this device and wipe this device and give it to somebody else, They will simply just authenticate as part of this process, and it will set up for them. We're taking away a lot of the kind of frustrations about returning these devices to service or wiping devices or moving devices around. But there is one even better than this. Let's just say again that this was perhaps a device that was a trolley device. The data that's on there there isn't really a data on there that's personal to anybody, but I really need to flip this device into a different use case like really quickly. If I'm creating identities for all of my use cases, so like I said, if you've got your shared devices here, I can just in the console, don't even have to wipe the device, I can just in the console flip the device to a different user. And what you'll see is it reconfigures itself automatically based on the fact that now it has a different identity, and therefore different automations could take place so that I get a different configuration. You can see it's got a different desktop, it's got a different app layout, there's different apps installed here as well. And when it's that easy to transform a device from this use case to that use case, or even if you just wipe it and sign into somebody else, you can see how that hassle of scaling just seems to just disappear. But you can also see why I said at the very beginning that deploying devices is the last piece of the puzzle. Because if you don't get all that stuff that we've just talked about throughout this session right, this becomes a hassle. And that's when things start to take a long time and we get our frustrations. So that's me. That very top link there has some resources for this session, including, as I explained at halfway through there, some of the data brokers that are on the Jamf marketplace that automatically work with Jamf School out of the box as well. So thank you very much. And I think we do have time for questions. I managed to do it within time. That's great.
Thanks, Ant. Any questions from anybody? I saw a lot of people taking pictures, screenshots. That's great. The material in the sessions will be recorded and available afterwards, so if you want a little bit more high-fidelity pictures of some of the diagrams that Ant has, I'm not sure when exactly they will be up, but working through processing as we get those up onto the portal. So
some of the key slides are already on the resources page as well.
There you go. See? Man thought ahead. Questions? Oh. Can you flip to the previous slide with your contact info?
Yeah.
Get a hold of him everywhere. There you go. He's not from around here, just in case you didn't catch that. Yes, sir.
So we are a new school. We're always been Microsoft, Windows, so we're new to Apple. New to Jamf, and we've maybe a year in. What's the best way for us to get started with this automation from, well, we use Colleague into Jamf School and get our devices ready for a user-based login system like you were talking about?
So the first thing that's the thing to tackle first, I suppose, is always about the identity piece, right? How am I going to get? So we saw that there was 4 different ways to get things in there. If we take out the import thing for a second, it's actually only really 3 that are mostly important. The 4th one's a nice to have, if I'm going to be completely honest. Those 3, it's around understanding how you can pull that data in, knowing now things like there's a direct connection for School Manager, that's perfect. But the real one is to do with the user import or the sync of the users prior to that. That's normally the one that becomes the most problematic because it's only the LDAP option natively in Jamf School. How are you going to bring that data in? Once you've cracked that, the rest of it really falls into place. Now, in terms of advice, like I say, the advice that I would firstly recommend is work with a data broker, work with your data broker and see if they can do it for you, because the connections, the APIs are there in order for them to do it. The second thing is, like, how skilled are you with creating these kind of automations? That's the next step. But realistically, if you crack the puzzle of syncing users into there, the rest of it really does just fall into place.
Great question. Any other questions?
I think there's one perhaps down here.
Just a comment to the last one there.
Yeah.
Most Apple SEs will point you towards Claris for automation.
There we go. Yeah.
Sir.
So one of the examples you had up there was switching users just by reassigning it.
Yeah.
So currently, I'm the central, and we have 28 schools that have a teacher tech.
Yeah.
And if they have a device that needs to go from a student to a teacher, I actually have to go into the ADE and switch the ADE profile and the groups in there. The way you did it, you just reassigned it to a user.
Yeah.
Explain, please, how I can do that, because
sure.
that drives me nuts.
Okay, so in your deployment, and this is why one of the slides said deployment with identity, right? I'm trying to make these devices as kind of generic as possible until I know who's on the device, who that device is. So from what you've just said there, it sounds like if it's a teacher, it gets a different ADE profile than if it's, I create a single, and I know this isn't always the case, so I appreciate that there's uniqueness to this, but I generally would create a single ADE profile that every device gets. And then not build the smart groups based on that IDE profile. It's based on the user, right? And even if you did need slightly different ones, depending on whether they were a student or a teacher, because I can understand perhaps you've got different things that you want them to set up as part of that, then you would, what you're doing at the moment is using the ADE profile as the thing that you are targeting the identity of. You would just need to switch that so that it's the user instead. So all the group automation that you've built is probably in place. You just need to, instead of be targeting the ADE profile, you need to target the particular user or user group. It's the user groups actually that you're targeting more than anything else, right? Does that make sense?
Kind of.
Okay. I mean, we can chat afterwards as well, right? And if you want.
All right, I can bring up my instance and you tell me what I'm doing wrong.
You can do some live cooking. There you go. Yes, sir.
I think you kind of hinted at this in your previous answer, but with the automation that you have displayed here, how would you say, looking to the future, that the concept of shared devices might not be as important compared to a user-based device? And the reason I ask that is in our school setup, K through 2, for the classes that have sets of iPads, you know, we just treat them as all shared devices.
Yep.
But as you know, there's problems with all the user data that gets generated on a shared device and having to either reset the device occasionally or all that kind of stuff. So what would be your opinion on shared devices, basically?
I guess, you know, I think they're essential, right? There's no way to get around that there are going to be deployments that have these. Lots of people start their Apple journey with shared carts and then grow from there. The age-old story of, hey, they get clogged up with user data is a painful one, and I don't think I have an answer for that directly, other than to say if you've got some sort of automation in place like this that you know that when you return it, it's going to be in exactly the same state but as a fresh, clean device, then that's probably the start of being able to go. It's not a problem, it's not a hassle, it's not going to take as much time as it perhaps would do normally if we've got something like this in place, whereby you can just hit a perhaps even return to service, you know, the feature that's return to service, and then we know because we've pre-assigned an identity to it, which is why I don't like calling them users, because that device should still have an identity, and its identity should be the class it lives in or the trolley that it lives in, because then when it gets reassigned, when it gets re-enrolled, because it has that assignment already, it still goes through that automation, and you know it's going to be in exactly the same state as it was the first time you enrolled it, if that makes sense.
Is return to service only available with Jamf Pro, or you can access it with Jamf School as well?
You can do it with Jamf School as well. The big difference with that is in Jamf Pro, return to service is API. And not in the console itself. In Jamf School, it's only in the console and not available via the API. But you absolutely have that feature in there as well. In fact, I was talking to a gentleman when we first walked into the room about it.
Have time for maybe one more question, if we've got it. I was never a teacher, so I'm not really good at just staring awkwardly and that 30-second. I am awkward, but not in that way.
Cool.
All right, with that, I just offer you to engage with Ant and have a great day. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.